Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Doug. I'm a wildlife photographer from Gilroy, California. In this video, I'm going to show you how to set up the Canon EOS R5 Mark II for triple back button start autofocus and then triple shutter button start autofocus. And what does that even mean? That means we're going to set up different autofocus areas on each one of these three back buttons and even the MFN button. Why would we need to do that? Because different situations arise when you're out in the field that require different sized autofocus boxes and even different components of the autofocus turned on or turned off. A perfect example is I see Mom Bald Eagle coming in with a fish a long way away, and I quickly change autofocus areas to this giant autofocus box. I let my subject tracking and detection do their thing. It's not long before they lock onto the eagle, and I get some really nice pictures as the eagle comes in. But as it gets closer to the nest tree, I know the eagle is going to fly in front of a very complicated background of sticks and branches, and this giant autofocus box isn't going to work. So I have to toggle to something smaller like this autofocus box. It takes a little more skill to keep the autofocus box on the eagle, but I'm certainly not going to grab any sticks and branches, so I can get some amazing shots like that. Then the eagle lands and starts feeding the small eaglet. Let's say that Pokey is the small eaglet, and there's no way I can lock the blue tracking box on Pokey. It's grabbing the owl in the background. So I need a third autofocus box. No problem. I just mash down the AF on button. That's got a spot autofocus box set up on it. Press the shutter to start. Take the picture, and I got a beautiful picture of Pokey. So that's a perfect example. I'm also going to do a full factory reset. So therefore, I'm going to have to go through all the key menu items for bird and wildlife photography. And I'm going to go fairly quickly through these. I just did a 2-hour video where I went very slowly. We talked about stock settings and then how to modify them. Same with the buttons and dials. So I'm going to go quickly through this video just to get us up to the point where we're going to modify these buttons. All right, with that said, off we go. All right, guys, in this part of the video, I'm going to do a full factory reset. So here we go. Let's go into the menu system. And again, there's a full table of contents down below. So if you don't need this, jump ahead. And here is the menu system, 3 layers deep. There's main icons on the top. There's submenus in the number form beneath. They took the numbers away, but you can still see the number there, 3, submenu 4, submenu 5. And then under the submenu are the actual menu items that will be adjusted. So to do a full factory reset, let's go to the wrench. And let's go to number 5, reset camera. Let's go into that. You can tap on the screen. I'm going to use the set button to try to keep my hands off the screen. And there's a factory reset right there, and click set or menu. Are you sure? Yep. Go to OK, and you can tap. I'll click set.
Give it a second. It takes a minute. It'll come back on. Don't you worry. Wait for it. Come on. There it comes.
All right, and you can take your time and go through this. I'm just going to hit English, and then I'm not going to worry about anything else. Just to save time, I'm going to check that info button so this doesn't keep bugging us when we restart things. Great. Next thing we have to do is to get this out of program mode. So there's a mode button here on the top. Let's push that in and see how we're in program mode, and let's get out of there. There's your shutter priority mode, your aperture priority mode. There's your manual mode. I always recommend shooting in nothing but manual. I don't like any of those other modes. Okay, go into that, or just press the set button. Great. Just to confirm, let's hit the mode button again, and yep, we're good to go. Next thing I want to do is get out of auto ISO. To do that, I have to tap on the screen, and if your screen, well, your screen should look like this, but remember the info button toggles different looks of the screen, so you might have to toggle a little bit to find it, but there's the auto ISO. If I tap on the screen, all I need to do is pull myself out of that. I can hop up to 800 there if I want. I explained that in a previous video. And now let's just give this thing some ISO. That'll make my back camera happy. Get some of the junk off here so I can see maybe a little bit more light. There we go. That should keep the back camera happy. All right, what's next? Let's turn off all the power savings modes, which I always do anyway. You can see it's powering off. I guarantee you that at some point you're going to miss something very cool because your camera was asleep. And even though this powers up really fast, let's watch it power up here. Powers up pretty darn fast, you're still going to miss something, I promise. So let's get out of those power modes. If you have more than one battery, that is. Canon's having a little problem with battery distribution right now. But I have 3 of them finally, so now I always get rid of these power savings modes. So let's go find it. I believe it is over in number 4. There we go. Wrench, submenu 4. Go down to power savings. Let's go into that and just turn all of these off. Off. Disable. One more. Disable. Great. In this section, we're going to set up the menu. And as I said before, we're going to go fairly quickly through this and save the gist of this video for the triple back button and the triple shutter button setups. So let's go into the menu. I already explained how this works, 3 layers deep. Let's go to big camera and let's just go right down the list. Big camera, submenu 1, and I don't mess with that because I don't shoot in JPEGs, but some of you might, so you can control the JPEG file size right here in this first menu. Again, I don't worry about that menu. I do need to set the image type size up because I only shoot in RAW. So I turn JPEG off. Let's go to RAW. Okay, great. The cropping aspect ratio, I don't mess with that. Let's go to submenu 2. We have anti-flicker. Those are indoor basketball shooting modes, which we're not going to talk about. But I do turn this detect prior AE while autofocus. So that's an automatic exposure mode, which I don't shoot in, so I don't want the camera goofing around with that. So I turned it off just in case. Let's go to submenu 3 of the big camera, or the red menu. Picture style, I shoot in RAW. It doesn't really matter, but it does color the way things look in your viewfinder and on the screen. So by tradition, I always go down to neutral here. Color space, I always go to full Adobe RGB, which has a few more colors on the palette, so to speak, than sRGB does. Clarity, I don't mess with that. Nothing else there. Let's go to submenu 4. White balance, you can leave it on auto. That works just fine, but I prefer to have the same white balance on all of my images no matter what. And then in post, I can adjust as I see fit. So I like to go to Kelvin, but I like it a little cooler than most do. I like it at 4800 Kelvin. Go back out of there and we can see it's set to 4800 Kelvin. I always turn lens aberration correction off, and I can do that in post in Lightroom. So I turn all of this stuff off. I also use DxO Pure Raw 4, and they have recommended that you turn all this stuff off to make the processing go a little quicker. With the EOS R5 Mark II, things have slowed down a bit, at least so far. Maybe I should mention I also have the first firmware update in here. I don't think I said that yet, but I do. High ISO speed noise reduction, turn it off. I use DxO for that. Disable. Okay, submenu 5. Nothing we need to worry about there. Don't mess with that. So you should memorize big camera number 6 because there's some irreplaceable settings here. So we have drive mode here. Because this camera no longer decreases you down to 12-bit when you're shooting in electronic, you can leave it in electronic shooting mode and not wear out the shutters and still have 14-bit a little bit higher quality image. So there's really no reason not to shoot in anything except electronic shooting mode now. These are the speeds, so that's full speed, that's 30 frames per second, that's 15 frames per second, high speed continuous. Low speed continuous is 5 frames per second, and I always shoot in one of these two modes. We'll see in a little while that you can manipulate those stock settings. If I don't want to shoot 30, I could drop this down to 20 or 15, and I'll show you how we set that up in a little while. So stock out of the box is fine. I like shooting at 30 frames per second. This is the pre-continuous shooting or the pre-capture, an amazing feature of this camera. But if you have this on all the time, it's going to fill up your SD card really fast, or fill up your CF Express card, which I'm sure you're going to be using with this camera. So I'm also going to put that on the quick control menu in a little bit. But disabled is fine. We'll turn it on when we actually go out birding. I've explained this before, but just real quickly, if I have a bird here sitting and I'm waiting for the bird to fly, well, let's turn it on first. Let's turn it on. It's really easy to turn on. Great. So if there's a bird sitting on the post and I'm waiting for it to fly, because those are the coolest shots when they take off. So I half press to engage the autofocus and to engage the pre-capture. You can see pre right up there. And we're waiting. And when the bird takes off and I take pictures, not only does it take pictures from the point where I press the shutter down, it gives me 5, 6, 7, 8 pictures before the point I even press down the shutter fully. So how cool is that? I'm getting shots that I've never got before with this feature. So I'm very, very happy with it. But just be careful. Don't leave it on all the time unless you have a very big CF Express card, because you will fill that up. Okay, another thing just to mention, the silent shutter function, you can quickly make the camera completely silent by toggling this on and off. Now watch when I push the shutter button. And most of the time I'm in this mode anyway, but it's nice to have that fake shutter sound so you can get an idea with buffer, especially if you're using SD cards, which you will hit the buffer, even though this is a stack sensor. But the reason you don't want to use it is because when you turn off your camera, the shutters will be wide open and your delicate sensor will be exposed to the elements. So there's a better way to do this, and I'll show you that in a little bit. But if you're in a pinch, you can use that. Okay, shutter mode is electronic. Now we see a lot grayed out. That's because I have silent shutter mode engaged. So with that on, you can only shoot in electronic shutter mode. So let's turn that off. All right, next we have shutter mode, and this is the only place in the camera you can control this. It still hasn't showed up as a quick menu option yet, and you can assign it to buttons, except for your favorites button. You can put it there. But these are the modes still: electronic, first curtain, and mechanical. I'm always shooting electronic now, as I said, because you're shooting full 14-bit no matter where you are. So you might as well be in electronic, which eliminates rolling shutter, eliminates shutter shock, and there's nothing but good with electronic shutter mode. Okay, turn this off as always. You don't want to go out birding and forget to put a card in and you're shooting away and nothing's being recorded. Okay, submenu number 7. All right, image stabilization. My lens has stabilization, so that's grayed out. This is a big one here. And metering and timing, we're not going to do anything with that, but this is a big one: customize quick controls. So let's clear out some of the junk out of the quick menu. So edit layout, give it a second. And there's our quick control menu. You can also get this menu by hitting the Q button, which is pretty ergonomically well positioned. You can hit that quite easy. I'm just going to uncheck all the stuff that I never use. Like, well, we can leave autofocus areas there, but we'll put them off to the side. But one shot, never use that. Drive mode. Yes, you definitely want the drive mode there. And I don't think there's really anything else we need in here, but we need to add something in a little bit. Let's go back here, just go through anti-flicker. Nope, don't need that. Subject to detect. Nope. Always animals. White balance. Nope, we set it and forget it. Okay, I'm just going to use my fingers because this is taking so long. Metering mode, we don't really use that, so that's unchecked. And there's one more that we want to check. If we go down here, there's some other options down here. And there is our pre-capture function. So it's very handy to have this on the quick control menu. So let's check it. There we go. And now don't go out of the menu yet. Let's go to rearrange things. So now there's what our quick control menu is going to look like. But let's grab that pre-shoot. I actually like to, I'm going to use my fingers here. I'm going to put it up to the top. I'm going to grab the autofocus areas and pull that down. There we go. And this one I really don't use, so I'm going to throw that on the other side. Then I'm going to pull that one up. And you can play with that as you want. So let's be careful going out. So hit exit, and then exit and save. And there we go. Now watch when I pull up the Q menu here. How cool is that? And now I'm on pre-shoot, and of course you can toggle between these, but I can just go set, enable, and it's enabled. And that's very handy out in the field, but because as I said, you're going to fill up your card if you leave that on all the time. So let's make sure it's turned off for right now. Already said we don't mess with metering timer. Submenu 8. Image review, so let's turn that off. I don't need that. You take a picture, it'll display it instantly on your screen. If I take a picture, I can push the play button and that'll pull it up. And I explained what that is in the last video, so we're not going to worry about that explanation. Blackout free display, leave it off, explain that. Display simulation, just going to make sure we're always in exposure. Don't put it in exposure and DOF. Leave it stock out of the box in exposure mode. It'll take away something from your autofocus system if you do. Nothing else there. Let's go into submenu 9. And down here, so you can do this at your own discretion, but this is the little warning that comes on when your camera's starting to get hot. And it comes on, in my opinion, way too early. And so if you put this in high, it seems to hold that warning back a little bit. And I have had zero problems with this camera overheating in stills mode anyway. I've had it out into temperatures up to 100 degrees and it hasn't overheated. The warning light has definitely come on. Maybe I'll flash something up. But I prefer to do that. Do that one at your own risk. Let's go to the autofocus menu. This is a big one. But a lot of this, I spent a lot of time explaining this. So servo, always want to be in servo. That means that when you're half pressing the shutter down, like I'm doing now, and the box is turned blue, it's focusing, refocusing. If the bird takes off flying, it will keep refocusing as the bird flies away or toward us or whatever. If you have it in one shot, that won't happen. You press, it focuses once, and it locks that focus on. So there's the quick explanation. Autofocus areas, what can I say? Super important. These are the sights of a BB gun. The object or the name of the game in bird photography is to pull one up, put it on the bird, start up the autofocus, stock out of the box. You have to press the shutter to start that up. Full press the shutter button to take the picture. And there you go. Review the picture. We can hit the playhead button and we have a nice sharp image right there. That's the name of the game. But will that box work for swallows, which are very fast, erratic moving creatures? That will never work. So we need to be able to call up a different autofocus box for that. And we can. We can go back in here and we can call this whole area autofocus, where the entire screen is the autofocus box. It would help if I actually set it, click OK. And now when I half press the shutter to start autofocus, see how the white is the entire screen here? So now we can handle swallows flying around. So that's pretty cool. But obviously that method is way too slow of going into the menu and going to autofocus area and selecting. We have to set maybe 3 or 4 of these up to these buttons so we can change autofocus area really, really fast. And that's the heart of this whole video. We're going to turn some of those off and leave some of them on. And it depends what type of birding you're going to do, how you set this up. I go out shooting hummingbirds. I set it up different. than when I go out shooting bald eagles. So, and we'll talk about that more in a little while, but those are the autofocus areas. Okay. So this one, whole area tracking servo autofocus. What the heck? That is tracking. That's subject tracking. So whatever you lock onto and that thing is moving around, this will stay locked on it. So that's very, very cool. But the problem is when it's on, you don't have any autofocus boxes. Let me demonstrate. So let's go back and pull up an autofocus box. And these are called autofocus areas, autofocus methods, autofocus boxes. The manual of the EOS R5 Mark II and others call them autofocus points. There's so many names for them. They're the sights of a BB gun, so I tend to switch between those names, but I try to call them autofocus boxes because every single one of them is a box. But watch what happens if I grab this single autofocus point box, which is a cool box, and there it is. When I start up the autofocus by half pressing the shutter, watch what happens to the box. It's gone, completely disappears. Why is that? And that's one of the downsides to using whole area autofocus. You basically have no more autofocus boxes. And so I always turn that off. We'll turn that on when we need to. So let's go turn that off so we have different autofocus areas. All right, and notice the icon there, the little circle with 3 horizontal bars going to the right. I call that the flashlight icon. There's quick ways to turn that on and off for those of you who use this a lot. And the whole area tracking is a lot better. It's a step better than the EOS R5 Mark I. I use this a lot more now than I used to. But for right now, let's turn it off. Great. Focus mode. Don't worry about that. Let's go to number 2. Subject to detect, always animals. For wildlife, that includes birds, cats, dogs, and horses, and zebras. Great. Eye detection. So this has a lot of different options. Auto means on, disabled means off. There's a right eye and left eye. We're going to get rid of the right and left eye because that's just too much detecting going on. We don't need that. Register people. We're not going to get into any of these basketball, volleyball modes. Let's go to number 3. So I explained this in detail in the last video, but I keep it in auto, and then I adjust the case down here and make it locked on. That makes the autofocus point more sticky. I've had really, really good luck with it. Surprisingly, with the manual mode, I set this up the way I did in the R5 Mark I, and it didn't work very well. So I'm using auto exclusively now, with the caveat we're setting case auto character to negative, which means the autofocus point is sticky. If the bird flies behind a tree and comes out the other side, the autofocus point will probably stay stuck to the bird and not jump on the tree. It's not perfect, but I'm happy with it like this. Okay, number 4. So servo, we're in servo, so servo first image priority. We need to make an adjustment there. Bump that over to release priority. One time I accidentally went out in focus priority, and an eagle flew in as I was talking to some friends. I didn't realize it was set like this. I pulled my camera up. Nothing happened. I was right on the bird. I was pushing the shutter down fully. It didn't take any pictures. I'm like, what the heck? And I looked back in my settings and I saw I'd mistakenly set it to focus. That means it will not take a picture until the subject is locked in focus. And that's not what I want. I'll decide if the object is in focus or not. So always keep that in release. One shot's the same, but we don't use one shot, so we don't need to worry about that. This is confusing, so that's preview autofocus. I don't know why they named it that. That's continuous autofocus or continuous autofocus servo. It's just like in video mode where it's constantly focusing. Even if your hands are off the autofocus start, it keeps focusing. The only time you would ever use that is if you're going to take a selfie of yourself. then you need to turn that on because it'll work really good then. There's nobody there to half press the shutter to get you in focus so you can struggle taking selfies, but that's the selfie button, they should call that. So lens drive when autofocus is impossible, leave that on. I don't care what the warning says, it works great. AF assist beam firing, that's a little red light. Let's turn that off. I think that may disturb animals in the dark. I hear it works, but I never use it out of respect for the animals. Limit the autofocus areas. So we're going to come back to this one, but you just have to uncheck it if you don't need it. And I certainly don't ever need these two. If I want helper boxes around my autofocus point, I'll take all the helper boxes there. Now if I click OK, and if we go back to menu 1 and we look at autofocus areas, see how they're grayed out? So I want you to memorize that one, autofocus 5, because that's the only place you can set that up other than your favorites. And you are going to use that when you go out birding because you need to change autofocus points again for the situation. Don't worry about that one. Limit subject to detect is the same thing. I only shoot animals, so let's turn off people. I certainly don't want it auto-detecting, trying to think what I'm trying to shoot. I don't shoot cars. I just want to be able to turn that on and off. Great. Eye detection is the same. I'll leave that on. When we come to the button setup, I'll come back to that one. But you can see we have right eye versus left eye. Actually, let's turn it off right now while we're here. So let's turn off right eye and left eye. We don't need those on. Just on, which is auto, and off, which is off. Great. All right, submenu number 6. So these are the non-automatic focus modes. And once in a while, especially in low light conditions, your autofocus system just won't work. So we have to be able to old school go into the lens and turn the barrel. Remember those days? And without these on, you're not going to be able to gain focus. You just have to use your eye to judge when the bird is in focus. So turn peaking on, and the default high and red are fine there. And I demonstrated this in my last video, but I won't do it here. Turn focus guide on. Great. So now if we need to use manual focus, we're all set. Let's go to submenu 7. Don't mess with this. There's a nice little, for AF settings, there's a nice little link that'll take you to the Canon manual for this camera, which is pretty cool. And it does work. Okay, playhead, nothing to do here except for one really important setting. I'll scroll through these so you can look at them. But if we go to number 4, magnification, some mess with. I leave mine alone. But if we go to submenu 4, here is just an amazing button right here. There's your blinkies if you want to turn on blinkies. They bother me. I know when I'm overexposed, so I don't need those on, but that's where you turn on your blinkies. Camera will blink if you're blown out in an area, but I love this one right here. AF point display, that should be enabled by default, I think. Let's see what it does. So now when I take a picture of something and I want to see that picture, I hit the playhead button. Look at that nice red box. That is where the autofocus struck, and that should be the site of most sharp focus. So that is invaluable. If you have a bird sitting in the sticks and you're not sure if you got the bird yet, you can quickly check to see where your autofocus point was striking. So very cool. All right, next we go to connectivity. I always go to airplane mode and turn that on, which will turn off Bluetooth. You can see that's disabled, and it turns off the Wi-Fi. That will help keep the battery alive a little longer. You can change the name of the camera there if you want to play with that. Number 2, there's 3, there's submenu 4. Nothing I do there. Let's go to the wrench. So this is important. So let's go into record function, card folder, select. And we got some work to do. So the top item we don't have to mess with, but the record options for camera, record options for movie, we need to make some settings there. So let's go in and go down to auto switch card. So now if my CF Express card fills up, it'll seamlessly switch over to using my SD card. I can always tell when that happens because I hit the buffer with the SD card and I don't with the CF Express card. Same with movies. I want it to seamlessly switch over to the SD card. Even more important, so record play in camera mode and record play in movie mode. So record play in camera mode, you have to go in here and check priority number 1. That's your CF Express card. That's that expensive super fast card. And if you have a CF Express card in and an SD card in, it's possible it could start on card number 2 and you're using the less quality card when you should be using the high quality CF Express card. I've had that happen. So make sure you check priority 1, and number 1 is the CF Express card slot. So you would think they would do that by default, but they don't. Okay, check it, set it, great. And there's folder, you can mess with that. Remember I warned you, well, maybe you didn't watch that other video, but remember now there's 2 folders that will come up on your CF Express card, one for movies and a separate folder for stills. When I first got this camera, I deleted my movies by mistake because I didn't realize they were in 2 separate folders. They used to be in the same folder. Not true anymore. Might be a way to fix that and revert it back to the old way, but I'm not sure on that. Somebody let me know in the comments if you know a way around that. All right, what else do we have here? Nothing more to talk about here. Let's go to submenu 2. You can set up time. Nothing else. Oh, now the beeps, though. This is important. Let's go down here. Let's leave beeps enabled. Okay, so they'll be enabled by default. Great. Let's go down to volume now, and this is where you can turn off the beeps. So shutter volume, this is the fake shutter sound. This is that right there, which is way too loud. So let's go back into volume with beeps on, and let's adjust that down to 1. And honestly, it's still too loud. Like the fox that I follow and some of the wild eagles that I follow, they don't like that noise at all. So I have to go completely silent. And if you want to go completely silent when you're in electronic mode, go back in here and just turn this completely off, as opposed to that other setting. If you go this way, see now it's silent, and you turn off your camera, the front shutter or the front curtains will close and protect your sensor. So that's the way you want to make this camera silent. I'll make a little noise just for the sake of the video. Everything else, turn off. You don't need the camera making noises.
Turn it off, turn it off. One more beep, turn off.
Okay, great. Nothing else we need in submenu 2. Let's go to submenu 3. Screen brightness. So obviously if you're out in bright sun, screen brightness 4 is not going to handle it. We're set up for my back camera right now, so I'm just going to leave that, but I'll crank that up if I go out birding. But this one I always change, so viewfinder brightness. I don't want the brightness changing in here. I want it full power all the time. So go to manual, and let's crank that up to 6, and that's just what I do. Great. All right, next, let's go down to screen viewfinder display. I don't know why this is set like this. I don't remember it being set like this in any of the other mirrorless cameras, but you have to go down to auto 2 because you want it auto switching. When you have your eye in the viewfinder, you want the screen to turn off to save power, and it doesn't do it stock out of the box. You have to set it to auto 2. Right, so now when pretend my eye comes down over the shutter, you can see how that automatically turns off. Great. Not set by default for whatever reason. Let's go to number 4, submenu 4. Always, this is on by default, but you always want these shutters closed when you shut down. Power savings, we already turned all the power saving modes off the first part of the video, so do that. Submenu 5. There's your custom shooting modes that you can set up. Remember, if you use the emergency movie start button here, the custom shooting mode 1 controls the settings in there. So I don't use that because now we have a quick little button over here where we can flick on the movie mode really quickly. So I'm going to actually get rid of that entire function there. But nevertheless, there it is. You can load your settings on a card. We're not going to worry about that. Let's go to submenu 6. You can set up your copyright information right there. So I just installed the only firmware update that they have so far. So I'm in version 1.0.1. Okay, new menu here. This is the green menu. We're going to be using this path a lot, going into customize buttons for shooting. And we'll explain that more when we get there. If we go down here, I don't use the touch screen. You can make it so you tap on the screen and it takes the picture, but multifunction lock. So if we go into that, you can see what is locked on this camera when you're in the locked mode. Up here on the quick control dial number 2, you have a lock switch. And if I go into that, quick control dial number 1, or the back dial I'm going to call it, doesn't work. The top dial or quick control dial number 2 doesn't work. The multi-controller or the joystick, which is what I'm going to call it, that's all locked. And sometimes I have the camera off and I see, oh God, there's a bird coming, and I don't push it over far enough. I'm accidentally in this locked mode and I want to try to move my settings around and nothing happens. So I want to make sure that doesn't happen. So let's go back in and fix that. So multifunction lock, let's just uncheck everything. And you can do what you want with that. That's just me. Make sure you click OK. And now I can adjust, oops, like I said, make sure you hit OK. Click OK. Now watch what happens. So I can adjust, I can move the autofocus area around. Great. Submenu 2. So this is an important one here. Maybe for somebody. I mean, for me it doesn't really matter, but I will set this up in the movie mode. But let's change this one. So autofocus area selection control. So right now, by default, the MFN button will toggle between the different autofocus points should you hit the rectangle button. Let's demonstrate that. If I hit the rectangle button, there's all the autofocus areas, and it tells me the MFN button is the toggler. That's what that means. So hit the MFN button, we go to the next autofocus area to the right, again to the right, to the right, to the right. And that's pretty cool. But it would be even cooler if I could go to the left if I wanted to. And that's what that button does. It changes that MFN to the main dial. So watch, let's do that. Let's go into the MFN. Let's go into the autofocus area selection control. And let's go down to main dial. Click set for OK. Now let's pull up the autofocus areas via pushing the rectangle button. That button, by the way, is the autofocus point selection button. We're not going to say that. We're just going to call it the rectangle button. Let's push it down, and now you can see it's changed to the main dial. So cool. I can go left to right, or I can go right to left. There's still way too many of these autofocus areas. We're going to get rid of those in a little bit. But yeah, that's what that does. Speaking of the rectangle button, look at that little flashlight is there, isn't it? So that's a way to quickly turn on the whole area autofocus tracking if you want. So hit the rectangle button and then just hit the info button, and now we've turned it on. But remember what I said about that. You will have no autofocus points unless you have a locked one called up. That'll still work. But all the other autofocus areas will disappear like that one. See how it disappears? Why is that happening? That's because subject tracking is on. So I prefer to have that off. But that's a way to toggle it on and off right there. Okay, bonus tip. Let's go back in. And there's nothing else we need to do there. Let's go to submenu 3. Nothing I want to do there. Submenu 4. This is the eye control part, guys. For me, it doesn't work. I don't know if it's because I have glasses, but I've played around with this quite a bit, and it just is not reliable, so I turn it off. And I'm not the only one who says that out there. Nothing else in that. Let's go to the little camera, I call that menu, or the orange menu. Nothing in submenu 1 that we need to worry about. Submenu 2, I do like to go same exposure for new aperture. This one doesn't work all the time. I don't know why it doesn't work all the time. But if I quickly put on a teleconverter, it will manipulate the exposure triangle. So it does work sometimes, but that's the setting that I have it on. Click OK. Great. Nothing else we need to do there. Submenu 3. So this is a new one. This is kind of cool. Remember I said that we could manipulate the drive modes? This is the new button that does that, continuous shooting speed. So if we go in here, those are your stock settings for electronic shutter mode. But anyway, you can modify things here. If you don't want to shoot in 30 frames per second, you can drop it down to 20 frames per second. But I mean, that defeats the big money you spent on this camera. But I do modify this one. So let's go down to high speed continuous. And let's bump that up to 20. For my experiments, I like to match the 20 frames per second of the EOS R5 Mark 1. And this is the way to do it here. And I could still, set it, hit the set button to set it. And I usually bump this up to about 12, which is just a number I'm familiar with. That's how I set up. You can do what you want with it, but that's a cool setting there. Okay, let's go to nothing else we need there. Let's go to submenu 4. Nothing we need there. That'll bring us to the star menu. So this is your favorites. You can put your favorites right here. I recommend you do take some time to set some things up. Let me do one favorite for you just to show you. So let's go into it. You can tap on it. I'll press set, OK, configure, select item to register. I'm pushing set again. And now you go choose one you want to put here. So a good one to put here is the shutter mode, because it's nowhere else except for big camera 6. And although I have it memorized, you probably don't. So there's shutter mode. So click OK or set, confirm, OK. And there it is. So let's see if it worked. Let's go into the star menu, and you can see it right there, shutter mode. And there's your options, mechanical, electronic, first curtain, or electronic. But we're in electronic pretty much all the time now. All right, guys, that'll do it for this part of the video. Let's get to the button setups now. We got some groundwork to do with some buttons first, and then we'll show you how to set up triple back button and triple shutter button autofocus. Here we go. All right, in this section, I'm going to show you how to set up triple back button autofocus and triple shutter button start autofocus. But before we do that, I have a few other buttons to set up to get ready for that. So I am going out birding later today, and I want to set this up for real. I did a full factory reset, and it's not ready to go, so let me show you. First button to set up is the depth of field button on the front of the camera, the DOF button. So let's go do it. And we're going to be using this pathway a lot. Go into menu, go into the green menu, the new green menu, submenu 1. Go up to customize buttons for shooting, click set, or you can tap on it, whatever you want to do. And there's the little cartoon of the camera there on the left, and notice the green glowing dot. When I turn any one of these dials, the green glowing dot moves around. So whatever that dot is on is what you're about to set. So let's go find the DOF button. There it is. Be careful, there's 2 vertical rows of menu settings. The one on the left has the little camera at the top. These are stills settings. That's what we're working with today. If you want to set this up for movie or video shooting, there's a video column there. That's what you would go into. They don't carry over these settings. All right, so you can tap on that DOF button, or I'm just going to hit set to keep my hands off the screen for you. And if you ever get lost here or screwed something up, the default button setting is always to the top left corner, just like this is. But we're going to go down to the eyeball area here. And not that one, that's for people. That's the AF on detect subject, that's for people only. Not this one, because it's got an AF after it, that's autofocus start. I don't want to start that autofocus up. Here's the one you want, eye detection. That'll turn eye detection on, eye detection off. Click OK. And now let's hit the DOF button, and you can see it's off, it's on. It's off, it's on. Okay? And just if you're just jumping here and missed the other part, I did turn off the options to look for a right eye versus the left eye on that menu I told you to memorize. AF5 is the turn off menu. We'll be going to that in a little bit. So anyway, we just set up eye detection on, eye detection off. All right, the next thing we need to do, now that we have eye detection turned on the DOF button, now we need to move the rectangle button. In the EOS R5 Mark I, it didn't really matter because it didn't do that much. I didn't use it for anything, so I didn't care if I overrode it. But now we do care because this is the way you modify the flexible autofocus boxes. I have one called up right there. And remember, to modify it, you push the rectangle button and then you push the rate button. And then those are the two modification dial options you have. So that's the main dial. That makes it more narrow. So let's make a small one. And then that's quick control dial number 1. That controls, or the back dial, that controls the height of it. And so that's a pretty good sized box, maybe just a hair bigger in both directions. Great, so now we have that set up. So if I erase that and put something else there, then how are we going to modify our flexible autofocus boxes? We're not, so we have to move it. And there's several different places we can move it. Personally, I put it on my movie start button. This is the emergency movie start button. I don't want to hit that by accident. So let's put it there. You could also put it on the illumination button as well. But there is a little landmine you could hit with that one, and I'll show you that landmine in a little bit. But for right now, let's move the rectangle button to the emergency movie start button. And we'll go into that same pathway. Let's just go find that button. And there it is already. Is that it? No. There it is right there. Let's click set to go into it. And there, 3 over, is the rectangle button. So let's go change it. Great. Autofocus point selection. Let's go set or OK. Great. Now when I hit the emergency start button, there's our familiar menu. So how cool is that? All right, now we have the groundwork laid for setting up triple back button start autofocus and triple shutter button start autofocus. Let's set up our first button. And this button will be used in both methods of starting up autofocus, front and back. So here we go. Let's set up the amazing MFN button. So stock out of the box, and there it is. It's right next to the shutter button, so it's ergonomically positioned really nicely. What does it do stock out of the box? If I push it, it pulls up this weird, useless menu right here, and you can get things so messed up by this. So let's, for goodness sakes, let's get rid of that right now. So let's go find it and get rid of it. I want to set that button up to toggle between the autofocus areas, just like the rectangle button does. With the rectangle button, I push it once and then I have to toggle. With this setup, it's a direct toggle. I don't have to activate anything, so it's even faster than using the rectangle button for changing autofocus areas. So let's go set it up. Same pathway, really easy to do. There it is. MFN, multifunction button. Let's go into it, and let's go down one and over one, and that is a very cool setting. Direct autofocus area selection. Let's hit OK. And now watch what happens when I toggle the MFN button, which means push it again and again and again and again. And you can see we're toggling through all the autofocus areas, all 12 of them. So that's the obvious next problem, because we don't want to toggle through all 12 autofocus areas. Now the downside to this is you can only go left to right. But let's get rid of them except for 3 or maybe 4 of them. Do you remember where to go to get rid of things? I told you, remember one button. That's AF5. AF5 is the elimination menu. So let's go up to limit autofocus areas. Let's go in and get rid of some of these. And which ones do we get rid of is the question. So it depends what type of birding you're doing. Am I going out shooting raptors or hummingbirds or swallows? So it depends. But usually I do this. I'll keep a locked single point autofocus box. So let's turn all the other ones off around it. And in fact, let's turn them all off except for a locked single point. Let's keep 2 autofocus areas. Don't need a third, and let's keep the whole area autofocus on as well. So be careful going out of here. Click OK. Okay, that wasn't too bad. Now watch when I toggle. And let's start. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. That's the full screen. Great. So now we have that pared down, and really that is our first button of the triple back button or the triple shutter button autofocus. That's the one you hit. And you can just leave it set. I'll leave it set like this and walk around. Okay, this is a locked autofocus box, so subject tracking and subject detection are turned off. So the box is always going to be there. The Canon autofocus is going to look inside of the perimeters of the box only. We can get a little pokey there without trouble. We can get this out. Now we're going to be in trouble if we see an eagle flying in all of a sudden. It's going to be difficult to keep this on a flying bird, so we want a bigger box. But that's no problem. If I hit the MFN button one time, there's a bigger box. That's not big enough, hit it again. Oh, we need to fix that one, don't we? But I could hit it again, and that's the whole area autofocus screen. So see how that works? Probably 85% of the time, that's the only button that I use. And I start my autofocus by half pressing the shutter. Let's fix this box. You remember how to do that? Great, let's go to the rectangle button. Well, I set it up. I have 3 places I could go to it. Let's try the illumination button. Great, and now let's hit the rate. And now those are our 2 controls. We just did this a little while ago, so I'm not going to explain it anymore. But let's make a box about like this, a little bit bigger than the first one. That's about what I usually do right there. Click OK. Let's toggle through our boxes now. There's our little one, a little bigger, and then there's the whole screen. So I'm telling you, you could probably go the whole day and never need to do anything more than manipulate the MFN button. And then you can start the autofocus as you want by half pressing the shutter or by pressing the AF on button. All right, great. So our MFN button is set and ready to go for this scenario of general birding. Now let's set up our second button, and we'll do back button autofocus first. So that means I need to take the autofocus start off the shutter button. So that's so easy to do. Let's go to that green menu. Let's go in, and it's right on the shutter button. Let's go in, and you can see it has AF on. If it has AF, that means it's going to start the autofocus system, and we don't want that. Nope, still starting the autofocus system. Now it's just metering start, which we don't have to worry about because we're shooting full RAW, but that'll work for us. There's no AF there. Don't use that one. That's the AE lock. So just metering start. Great. Now, when I half press the shutter button, it's not turning blue. That means it's not starting. The autofocus is not starting up. Great. So how are we going to start up the autofocus system? Just hit the AF on button. By default, autofocus start is set up on the AF on button, and it does not pull up any autofocus area. So why is the full screen going there? That's because the MFN button is set to full screen. If we toggle the AF on button to a locked autofocus point and we hit the AF on button, all it does is start autofocus. But let's go look at it anyway, because maybe yours isn't set like that, or maybe you've been messing around with it. So let's go find the AF on button. There it is right there. Let's go into it. And yeah, you can see it's the stock setting because it's all the way to the top in the left-hand corner. And that's AF start. But there's a magical menu right there that's kind of hidden. The detailed set, the info detailed set, meaning if I hit the info button, or you can tap on it, it brings up this very cool submenu. And AF start is on. AF start position, I'm not sure why that's always checked, but we don't need it on. And if I want to assign an area, I don't know why you would, but if you wanted to assign an area to it, you always check it and set it. All of these settings are override settings, so be careful with them. They'll override anything else you do in the camera. So let's check it. Let's go into it, and you choose whatever box you want here. Let's say you want a locked, oh, I don't know, just whatever you think, because this is not the way I would do it, but just to show you it would work. And then let's scroll through to make sure nothing else is checked by mistake. Okay, and then we go out, hit menu, and you have to hit OK again. And now when we mash down the AF on button, it starts autofocus, and there's that random box we just pulled up. See how that works? But why would you do that when I have the MFN button controlling the AF on button? So there's no sense of doing that and overriding that. So let's take that back off. Does that make sense, I hope? Let's go find it. And let's go into info detail set, and let's just go uncheck it. Great. Menu, OK. And now we're back to normal. If we're walking around with this box and we see a bird and we hit the AF on button, no problem. We started autofocus, took the picture. Let's see where it hit, right on the owl, so everything is good. Great. Let's set up the star button to do something a little different. So I would like to put the single autofocus point with helper boxes around there, because we don't have that set up on the MFN button. So let's go put that one there. Let's go find the star button. Great. And you can go right there to AF metering and start. It's all set up for you. And there's another info detail set menu. Let's go into that. Let's uncheck that. Let's go to AF area. And let's go find, and again, you put whatever you want in here, play around with it. I want a locked single autofocus point box with these helpers around it. Click OK, menu, OK, double OKs. Did you see that? Had to hit OK twice on the way out. Great, so now I got this owl, or let's say we're trying to get pokey with this box. Oh no, we can't get pokey. It's jumping over to the wrong owls. So if I mash down the star button, we have a locked autofocus box. We can get pokey, no problem like that. See how quick that is? All right, and last but not least, for the rectangle button, let's make it pull up the entire whole screen as the autofocus area. And I know I have it here already. That's what we're going to do. But maybe I'm walking around like this, and suddenly I see an eagle heading right at me. I want to be able to hit something really fast. So it's easier just to hit a button. So let's go do that next. I mean, for me, I'm so good at the MFN button, I could quickly toggle over there to that whole screen autofocus. But let's go find the rectangle button. Great. Now there's no info detail set, is there? So there's two ways you can set this up. Let's go to the eyeballs. And I'm pretty darn sure they both do exactly the same thing. And there's eye detection autofocus start. And that's what we want. Click OK. And now, so here's the scenario. We see this little owl. Oh, look, over to our right, there's a huge eagle coming. I need the whole screen autofocus area on quickly. Just mash down the rectangle button, and you can see the entire screen is now detecting. You can see the white box all around there. So pretty good. All right, so that's one way to do it. And I'm pretty sure subject tracking and detection are on here. Also notice if I mash down the rectangle button, notice how the eye detection has come on. And it doesn't matter if I turn it off here, eye detection off, and I mash down the rectangle button, it's back on again because it's an override setting. It's eye detection with AF start. So, and I'm pretty sure subject detection is on here as well. Subject tracking is obviously on, but I'm not 100% sure. I can't confirm that in the literature, but it sure seems to work that way. So just in case, we can set it up another way to make double sure that subject detection is also on in this mode. Let me show you how. Let's go in, same location, find the rectangle button. And now let's go down to the camera with a line going through it, an arrow going right through it. Oh, how cool is that? We have an info detail set button. Don't set this yet. Let's go into this first. So go into info, or you guys can click right on detailed set. Now the only drawback with this is you got a lot of work to do, and I'm going to just use my thumb here, so sorry about this, but I want to uncheck everything. So just start unchecking things, because remember, these are override settings. And if you push the rectangle button down with this engaged, this stuff will work. So whole area tracking, I'm going to leave that on. I'm pretty sure it's on anyway, but let's just leave that on just for fun. Subject to detect, let's just make it animals. Great. So subject to checked animals. Spot detection, even though it's grayed out, make sure you uncheck it. Eye detection, let's leave it on. Pretty sure it will be on anyway, but let's just leave it on. Servo, I mean, we already have most of this set up in the main menu, so there's no sense to do that again. Acceleration, deacceleration. See, we can override all these settings. Start position. So now we have subject tracking on, which is the top one, and subject detection on for sure. Now there's no question that they're on. Now the only thing we need to do now is make sure we start the autofocus. Now if we go down here to AF operation, looks like it's on by default, but let's just double make sure. Use autofocus. That will start the autofocus. And now we're set, so be careful. Don't hit register. Don't register these. All kinds of problems happen. I won't talk about that. Click menu. Click OK. And now when we mash down the rectangle button, the ego's coming in, it looks like it does the same thing, doesn't it? But now we're 100% sure that subject detection and recognition are working, so now there's no doubt. All right, that's triple back button autofocus start. But that's not the way I shoot these days. I really have gotten tired of hitting these little buttons with my finger. Because if I'm in my shooting mode, I'm really using my IP, my interphalangeal joint, to hit the AF on button and the star button. And then I use the tip of my thumb to hit the rectangle. It's just, for me, for my old hands and wrists, why bother with it? I'm just going to use the shutter button to start the autofocus. So that's shutter button, start autofocus. And if you wanted to, we could set up 4 buttons to toggle between different autofocus setups. So let's do that one now. All right, guys, let me show you how to set up triple front button start autofocus, where we push the shutter button to start up the autofocus. And then we assign 3, even 4 of these buttons to quickly call up different combinations of the autofocus system. So the very first thing we need to do is we need to put the autofocus start back on the shutter button. So if you're just joining me for this part of the video, you're going to be all set because that's a stock setting. But we just did triple back button start autofocus. So same pathway. And it's already on. Just turn the dial to find the shutter button. Let's go into it, and let's click over one, metering and autofocus start. You guys who have just come to this part of the video, you're like this, I would jump it over here to metering and autofocus start. All right, great. If I half press the shutter button, you can see that the autofocus is starting quite nicely and great. So the first button we're going to actually set up is already set up, as we've said. It's the MFN button. If I toggle the MFN button, we eliminated all the autofocus areas except for 3. And I said these will change depending on the terrain, depending on the environment you go into, depending on the bird you're after. So this is just kind of a general way to set it up for me. So, but anyway, the MFN button is 1. So I select my autofocus area. Let's grab this one. I want to grab the owl, half press the shutter to start, full press to take the picture. Confirm by hitting the playhead button, no problem. Now a problem arises if we go for pokey. See, I can't get the little orange horse there. With that, if I toggle again, can't get it. In fact, I got the owl's eye in the background for a minute. If I toggle again, can't get it. That's whole area. If I toggle again, now we have our single autofocus point box. It's a locked box. I can get pokey, no trouble. But it did take me a while to do all that toggling, right? I had to toggle that way, that way, that way, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's better if we have some other options set up where we can quickly go to another type of an autofocus box. So let's set the AF on button to bring up a tiny little spot autofocus box that is locked. So let's go in, same pathway. Let's go find the AF on button. There we go. All right, now we don't want to double start the autofocus because this says AF on and it's got an info detail set, so I could set it up like this, but I don't want to double start the autofocus if I can help it. It's just best not to do that. It's okay to do it that way, but it's best not to. And I won't explain what can go wrong because rarely, if you're pumping the shutter button to try to gain focus or regain focus, you might accidentally be mashing down the AF on button and it's not really going to be turning the autofocus on and off. So just trust me, it's best not to set it up like that. And we can work around that just fine. Let's go down just one row, and there's a switch to registered autofocus function menu, which is amazing. It's got the info detail set, so let's tap on that, or I'll just hit the info button. And now there, right off the bat, we can choose autofocus area, but you got to check it and set it. Let's go in. And I always set mine up like this. I want a tiny little locked autofocus box. Subject tracking is not going to influence. Subject detection is not going to influence it. It's going to be an old school look for contrast and detail autofocus area or box or point, whatever you want to call it. Great. And I don't need, because it's locked, I don't need to turn off subject tracking or subject detection. I could if I wanted to, just for fun. But let's just zip through here to make sure nothing else is turned on by default, and it's not. So click Menu. Be careful now. Menu. Okay. Great. So now in that scenario, let's say I'm walking around with this autofocus box, and oh, I need to get pokey real quickly. Oh no, I can't get pokey. I can mash down the AF on button, and I got pokey. No problem. Press the shutter fully. And let's check the results of the work by hitting the playhead button. And you can see the red autofocus box has landed right on Pokey's neck. And we have a very sharp picture of Pokey. See how that works? And then, so that's 2 buttons set up. For the third, let's set up the star button just to be a little bit bigger. I'd like the single autofocus point box around for that one. Let's go into the same pathway, find the AE lock button. There it is. Let's go into it. And again, we don't want to start up the autofocus. So what's the fix? We have to go look for that camera with the arrow going through it, all the way down at the bottom. There it is. Let's go into it by hitting the info button. And here's our options. Now, if you're just joining me for this part of the video, you're going to have to uncheck all these because these are override settings. So uncheck all of these. We already did that. Let's go find the autofocus area. Let's go into it, and I like this locked single autofocus point with helpers around it. Let's go into that. Great. And there's no reason to have these set. So I can just, even though they're grayed out, we can uncheck them because we did that in the last part of the video. So because the locked box means everything's turned off. And we definitely don't want to double start, so make sure you turn that off. Great. So let's go Menu, OK. And now we can get Pokey 2 ways. We can mash the AF on button for a spot autofocus, or we can mash down the star button for a little bit bigger locked autofocus box. So guys, there you go. That's triple front button start autofocus. We could even do 4 buttons if you wanted. We could set the rectangle button up to pull up a whole screen tracking box. So that's real easy. In fact, I think it's already set to do that. The only caveat behind that, and let's go to the same place and find it as I talk. The only caveat behind that is you're going to have to double start autofocus. So let's go into it. And we can't use this again because it'll override what we just did. So let's go back to the top, or let's go back to the eyeballs, and let's use this one right here. Eye detection, autofocus, start, that should say. Click set, OK. And now when we mash, let's say we're working on this owl, and here comes the eagle flying in. We need to quickly pull up a whole screen autofocus box. I can mash down the rectangle button and we have that really, really quick. What's another way I could get to that whole screen tracking box? It's on the MFN button, so I could hit the MFN button once, twice, and we're at the same place. Okay, see how that works? So there you go, guys. That's triple back button start autofocus and triple, even quadruple shutter button start autofocus. So if you have any questions, leave them down below. I'll get those answered. Consider giving me a thumbs up if you got anything from the video. Consider subscribing to the channel so you can see my next EOS R5 Mark II video. I got one already shot. I'm just editing it right now. So if you want to be notified, hit the little bell notification. You know the deal, right? All right, see you in the next video.